Okay, this video is entitled Free Will Part 2. We'll be subcaptioning it as a scandal so monstrous. A reminder, this is written by a young man called Sam Harris. He studies neuroscience, or he says he does, and I'm certain he does, but I don't study that. But anyway, it says in the blue here on this page 1 of his book about free will, he says, if the scientific community were to declare free will an illusion, it would precipitate a culture war far more belligerent than the one that has been waged on the subject of evolution. Of course, it's provocative. He's hoping to stimulate this warfare, this culture war of words, which is fine. It's about the economy. People can buy this and read it and then mock people who don't have much of an answer anyway about the extent to which you'll find people discussing today. This is 2012. What they're doing basically is just arguing whether or not the Bible itself teaches free will or not, which really isn't. It's just that hermeneutic error of not first defining the term. He doesn't define it in this little booklet. He just goes on and speaks endlessly and he's using the energy around the topic, how volatile it is, to let it catalyze. And this little booklet's just a carrier, a device, if you will. But we'll look at this is a 2010 little book, English Grammar to Ace Biblical Hebrew. And in it, it speaks of Hebrew action, the causative, page 79. Of course, this is my bookmark, Landmark Media Production. This would be your leading source for hermeneutics. But anyway, you'll notice if you don't have good hermeneutics, you won't have apologetics. You'll have more of an irrational response for your certainty. But the Hiphil stem is a causative, so the fact that atheists don't believe the Bible's fine, and the fact that religionists don't use the Bible to define their terms, which is fine, that just maintains the volatility. This scandal to which I made reference. Well, let me, just before we go to our text here, this is a quote from a book, 1896 edition, and it states that the understanding recognizes this contradiction. Now, the book explains that in context, but just for the sake of this lesson, we'll cover that. But it says, while at the same time it cannot think it, cannot, that is, look at it from any point of view from which the contradiction should disappear. Now, this is the flummox that is intentionally waged upon people. The writer, or that is the Hegelian dialectic, Dr. Hegel, asserts that it's intentionally propagated upon people. That is, that people create a crisis so that there's value for the solution. And now you can see that where, without a knowledge of the Bible or an interest in the text itself, the contradiction between free will or no free will, or the perceived, actually invented contradiction between sovereignty and free will, that continues to catalyze and generate quite an economy. It is difficult to find people interested in the text itself, evidenced by or demonstrated by their unwillingness to define their terms from the text. But again, this is not that type of ministry. This is an apologetic and outreach ministry of a New Testament church. So here in this grammar, never use this one. This is a modern grammar. It is a 1992, but on page 111 it speaks of the Hiphil, the causative, showing here he caused to know, speaking here of the subject being the one who causes in the relationship of the action and the subject. So there's another one of those modern type grammar things. Here's a nice little compact modern thing. Of course, this older grammar, all this is very consistent. The Essentials of Biblical Hebrew, Yates and Owen. If you can find one of these, they're nice to have. This is my collector's edition. I keep it for myself. The one I actually use has been literally, let's say, modified. It comes in with holes and all the notes and markings and things of that nature. But in it speaks of the Hiphil causative, which is striking because among religionists, I can certainly understand why they have no interest in the contradiction disappearing. It would destroy their economy as well. But now in this little book, An Introduction to Biblical Hebrew Syntax, it's a modern type book, and on page 438 it shows an example. Of course, they misquoted. They had Exodus 8:11. It's actually Exodus 8:15. But as my teacher said, the more you use resources, you'll become more accustomed to slight errors in it, as we all are prone. And it just says Pharaoh hardened, and then it mentions Hiphil. His heart literally caused his heart to become hard. So that was causation by the king of Egypt, whom God raised up. And of course, God had to sustain him in that conflict because God was using him as the king of Egypt. And among the Egyptians, God lifted him up from all the Egyptians and promoted him, just as from among the Hebrews, God promoted and lifted up Moses to be the deliverer. So in that conflict. So here on this page, 435, this author asserts that the Hiphil originally signified one subject causing something, the second subject to be or to do something. And that's what we'll look at for just a few moments. But the scandal about free will is intentional. It's all about marketing. It's about sensationalizing, and that's why I title it A Scandal So Monstrous, because a person comes face to face with just how intentional these charades are that are used to merchandise people. They'll find very quickly that it seems that no one can develop a point of view from which the contradiction should disappear. So it appears that instead of being apologists, it seems to be many are nothing more than propagating and promoting and sustaining contradiction. Notice some resources that say they're apologetic or apologist, they're skewed or biased. So they have an apology for, let's say, their Calvinism, or they have an apology for their Arminianism. But where's the solution? That is, where is that which would remove the contradiction, since we're taught that the scriptures don't contradict? And here's that text more specifically evaluated. This is an infinitive here. So Pharaoh being the subject, he is the one who caused, and that's a sign of the direct object. And here's his heart, his heart, his heart. So Pharaoh resulted, there we go, resulted to cause, there we go, cause, and of course here's the direct object, his heart, which we have that, his heart, there, and then to be, and this word refers to hardened or grievous, so we'll just put hard for the major thing is that the Bible does demonstrate agent causation, causal agency. But again, the discussion between Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and the deliverer of the Hebrew people had nothing to do with, is this preventing Pharaoh from going to heaven? That's really not even in the discussion. And when it's discussed in the New Testament, which you can learn about that in, on the IAmEVER resource, but when it's discussed in the New Testament, Paul hardly is establishing anything except the prerogative of God to use men as he chooses. Men are still causal agents, and I really don't know that Paul would have cared if later he would have loved to have seen, that is, he cared in the compassionate sense, if he would have heard Pharaoh after the conflict or whatever was taking place. This hard condition was to endure the conflict that God arranged to demonstrate his glory. But Pharaoh could have learn from all those signs and all that. Of course, he was destroyed ultimately, but many Egyptians had seen and learned and saw the demonstration and caused themselves to believe. So, but this is, you can see where there's no energy here for this. The work you have to do to learn these things or look them up or to care to invest money in some type of syntax book and to go out and search for a collector's edition of a Owen and Yates, to have to endure the endless production of new modern gadgets, of new grammars, and then come up with this recent novel idea of this grammar here, and then to watch people in the realm of atheism against religion drop in these volatile triggers to pull, to catalyze this culture war and to incite all this emotion. And of course it works. The leaders, the propagators of all this then will come out and counter this and counter that and keep the people busy. And it's intentional, because religionists don't have responsibility to define their terms. And they don't have responsibility to document those terms once defined, and then they certainly don't have an interest in defending, that is, providing a rationale. So this is enough. It's just free will is just one of the many things about which you'll see this scandal taking place, similar to the young or old earth scandal and contradiction that people can't seem to perceive from any, or they can't think of any point of view from which that contradiction would disappear. And yet the Bible is exactly that. The Bible itself is and provides us the point of view from which such contradictions disappear. And that's why we can call men to come out from even those conflicts and contradictions and that ultimate one blind spot that prevents them from perceiving a point of view from which the contradiction would disappear. So from Genesis all the way through the entire Old Testament will demonstrate how these points of view, especially in the context, that's your main determinant, and even with an English Bible and context. But when the English Bible leaves out the word cause, which it includes in Genesis 2:21, where God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and then in Genesis 15:6 it's omitted, and that could be because the bias of the theology of the translators. They were Calvinist, and everyone's biased by their own theology and pre-understanding. So that's enough. This is a good example. It's just a scandal so monstrous that most of us would rather not believe that it even exists. But the good news is the Bible is a point of view from which contradictions like this do indeed disappear.